Hey, how's it going, everybody? My name is Troy Hackett. I'm the head TA for Managerial Accounting for Professor Paz's class. And today we're going to be going over the activity-based costing question in the Practice Prelim 2 and only that question. So these videos is going to be one question at a time or one topic at a time. So the Prelim 2 the Practice Prelim 2 has 5 topics, I believe. So each video will cover one topic, and we'll go from there. So in this video, we're only covering the ABC costing question, which is talking about standard versus super cool. So let's hop right into it, and I'll explain how to do it and explain a little bit more about ABC costing and traditional based costings. The reason why I'm explaining those concepts as well is because when you're doing a question like this, if you don't understand the concepts, you can't do a question. So I'll be explaining both things, and hopefully by the end of the video, you can understand how to do this. And as always, I do hold office hours. So if you need additional help, just come to my office hours. I don't know what they are right now because I'm recording this during winter break, but just go on Canvas, check the office hours, and go from there. And if you're not taking this class in spring 2023, you're kind of screwed because I've probably would have already graduated, but I'm sure there's another TA in the class which can help you out. So anyways, Banger LLC manufactures 2 models of gaming computers, standard and super cool. Banger currently uses a traditional job order costing system and applies overhead on the basis of direct labor hours. So this is very important, right? So they're currently using traditional job order costing, which is very common because job order costing is much easier to do than ABC costing, because traditional based costing, you only allocate your overhead by one thing, and that one thing can change. It could be labor hours, it can be machine hours, it can be machine costs, it can be labor costs, it can be supervisor hours, etc. Because your overhead is only allocated by one specific thing, it's very easy to allocate. So for example, I'm just going to write an example, right? So if your overhead is $20 and you're allocating based off direct labor hours, right? So your overhead, this is your overhead cost, and you're allocating based on direct labor hours, and there's 2 hours, then your cost of overhead is just $10 per hour. So for every labor hour you incur, you're incurring $10 of overhead costs. Hopefully that makes sense. But basically, just keep in mind that with traditional based costing, you're only using one allocation basis. So let's keep going. Anticipated overhead and direct labor time for the upcoming accounting period are 3.2 million and 50,000 hours, respectively. Information about the company's products are as follows. So to give us some information about standard and super cool, there are 2 products. Standard, they made 10,000 units. It cost $56 from a direct material standpoint and $90 from a direct labor standpoint. And super cool, they made less units, but their cost for that product is a bit higher. And now they're saying that recently the controller of Banger LLC has been considering whether the cost allocations under their traditional costing systems are accurate. She decided to test out a activity-based costing system and compared the results. The controller, without consulting any other employee or manager, identified 3 major activities: order processing, machine processing, assembly, and product inspection hours. Order processing uses the number of orders processed as its cost driver. Machine processing uses the number of machine hours worked as its cost driver, and assembly costs are driven by the number of labor hours worked. And finally, product inspection uses the number of inspection hours as its cost driver. The $3.2 million in total overhead is divided across 4 cost pools as followed: order processing, $5 million, machine processing, $1.6 million, assembly, $800K, and product inspection, $300K. So what's going on here is in ABC costing, you use multiple things to allocate your overhead. So instead of only using one thing, you use either 2, 3, 4, or even 5 things to allocate your overhead. In ABC costing, you take that initial overhead cost and you break it up into little chunks, and each little chunk is allocated by a different thing. Like one part of the overhead is allocated by inspection hours, another part of the overhead is allocated by assembly hours, etc. They give us additional data so about the orders processed, machine hours worked, inspection hours. And the first question, number A, is what is the unit cost of standard and supercool under the current job order costing system? So remember, in the current job order costing system they're using is traditional, right? So that means that our overhead is only allocated by one thing. And in this case is based off of labor hours. So the first thing I want to do here is I want to take our total overhead, so that's 3.2 million, and divide it by our labor hours, which is 50K. And I divide that and we get $64. So that's telling us that for every labor hour we incur, we use $64 of overhead. So whenever you're doing traditional based costing, that's the very first thing you want to do. And now we gotta cost the products out, right? And they want us to do standard and supercool. So I'm gonna start out with standard first. So standard. And remember, what we gotta do is we're gonna do DM plus DL plus overhead, right? So DM is direct materials, DL is direct labor, and overhead is, or OH is overhead, okay? And we gotta add those three together to find our unit cost. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add our direct materials, which is 56, add our direct labor, which is 90, and our overhead is gonna be 64 times 3. And the reason that is the case is as we look at the question right here, we incurred 3 hours per unit, right? So this $64 over here, so I gotta keep changing my pen, but this 64 is only for 1 hour of labor. And we incurred 3 hours of labor to create this standard product. So that's why we're multiplying by 3, and we get a whopping total of $338. So that is our unit cost for standard. And now let's go over to supercool. So supercool, same process, right? DM plus DL plus overhead. So I'm gonna do our DM, which is 84. I'm gonna do my direct labor, which is 120. And finally, I'm gonna add my overhead, which is gonna be 64 times 4, because a supercool, you know, is a super cool product. It needs a little bit more labor time to be done, right? Which is why we're using an extra hour. And we are gonna multiply this or add it up together, and we get a grand total of $460, okay? And that's it. Traditional base costing is something where on the exam, you don't want to miss points on, because it's very, very easy. And if you just follow this exact process every single time, you shouldn't miss a point. Like if you miss a point, it's pretty embarrassing, and you're just leaving points out there on the table. You always want to get the easy points, and traditional base costing is one of the easiest points you can get in the exam. So just study this, make sure you don't forget it, and don't miss it on the exam. It's easy points. So B is, they want us to do the same thing, find a unit cost, but they want us to use an ABC costing system. So this is a little bit different. Now what we gotta do is, as I said earlier, break up our overhead, that big overhead number, that 3.2 million, into different chunks and allocate each one by a different thing. So I'm looking here, so I'm gonna do my, I gotta break it up. They tell us that there's 4 different things we allocate our overhead by. So there's orders processing first. So orders processing, they tell us is 500,000, and they show us that right over here. So it's 500K. And they tell us that order processing uses the number of orders processed as its cost driver. Okay. So right over here, we know that they tell us that it is 500 orders total. So I'm going to do 500K divided by 500, and we find out that each order process costs us $1,000 of overhead. Right. Good start. And now we're going to do that for every other thing. So now we're going to do machine hours, or we'll do machine hours or machine processing next. So machine processing is 1.6 million, and they tell us as based off of machine hours. I'm going to divide that by 40K hours. So we incur $40 of overhead for every machine hour done. And then we're going to do inspection hours. So inspection hours is 300K, or inspection hours cost is 300K. And then we did 10,000 hours, so we divide that and we get 30. And then finally, let's do assembly, right? So assembly is going to be 800K, and I'm going to divide that by, let's see here. Assembly is based off of labor hours, so that's 50,000, right? So that one's a little bit more tricky, but if you just read the directions, it's not that bad. But it says assembly is driven by the number of labor hours, and they tell us labor hours right over here. Okay, so I don't think that's too bad. So we divide that and we get $16. So now we've done, we figure out, how much it costs per order, how much it costs per machine hour, how much it costs per inspection hour, etc. And now our next goal is to find out the total overhead costs for standard and for super cool. All right, so what I just did was I redid our work. So I removed all the work and only put the numbers we actually need to, keep going with this question just to make room on the page. So now we're gonna do standard first. So for standard, what I'm gonna have to do is I'm gonna have to multiply each overhead number by their respective standard number. So for example, for orders process is 1,000, so it's gonna be 1K. And I'm gonna multiply it by how many orders standard use. So in that case, it's gonna be 320 here. And we see that over here, 320. So I'm gonna multiply that, and I'm gonna add to that 40 times 16,000 hours, because how many hours the standard product used. And then I'm gonna add 30 times 4,000 plus 16 times 30,000. And assembly is a little bit more tricky because with assembly, they don't give you the number of hours upright, but we know that for standard that they use 10,000, they made 10,000 units, and each unit they spent 3 hours on. So, you're using a grand total of 30,000 hours. So I'm gonna add that up. And if we do the calculations, 1,000 times 320 plus 40 times 16,000 plus 30 times 4,000 plus 16 times 30,000, I'm gonna get 1.56 million. So we went from basically having the total overhead for all the products, and now we only have the overhead for one product, which is standard, which is a great start, right? Because we're trying to find the cost for only one product, and now we found the overhead cost for only standard. So we're on the right track. And now what we gotta do is divide this by 10,000 units, and we divide that by 10,000, and we figure out that the overhead cost for standard is 156. Took total overhead divided by units, and that gets me overhead per unit. But we're not done yet, because they're asking us here to find the unit cost. So unit cost has direct materials, direct labor, and overhead. And currently we only have the overhead cost. So what we gotta do is do 156 plus 56 plus 90. And when we add that up, I get 302. And that is our answer for standard. And now let's do super cool. So super cool, same process, but we've already done quite a bit of the work. We've already done our, we figure out, how much each order costs, how much each inspection hour costs, and we don't have to redo that. We can use those same numbers for super cool. I'm looking here, and they tell us that super cool, they use 180 orders. So it's gonna be 1K times 180 plus 40 times 24,000 plus 30 times 6,000 plus 16 times 20,000. I get 1.6 1.64 million. And now finally, remember this is overhead, total overhead for Super Cool. So we got to divide it by their units. So Super Cool, we have 5,000 units. And by dividing it, we get the overhead per unit, and we get 328. And finally, what we gotta do is add in our direct material and direct labor costs, 84 plus 120. So I'm gonna add those up, 84 plus 120, and I get 532. And let's just check the answer key, and that is right. So, you know, ABC costing, a little bit more difficult, but just keep in mind when you're doing ABC costing, your first goal is to find the cost per order, the cost per machine processing, the cost per inspection, the cost per assembly, and then from there you can work on standard and Super Cool, or work on whatever products you're trying to solve. So in ABC costing, the very first thing you want to do is find that cost per hour, cost per inspection, etc. So let's look at part C. So part C says, is the Super Cool product undercosted or overcosted by the traditional costing system? Explain why this happened, be brief. I'm looking at here, and I would say that the Super Cool product is undercosted. Because, you know, when we're using traditional base costing, we thought it costed $460 to make this product. But in reality, when we use ABC costing, the more accurate costing system, we found out that in reality, it costs $532, right? It costed a lot more than we had initially estimated. So currently, we're probably undercosting this product. We got to raise that price with Super Cool so we can actually make a profit off of it. Part D says, the information given in the problem states that the controller independently identified the cost pools and allocated costs associated with the pool. We discussed several issues during class which suggest this might be a bad idea for the company. Identify and briefly discuss one of those reasons and give 2 suggestions related to how the controller can ensure that ABC cost data is accurate and useful for decision making. Be brief. And what I would write here is you gotta make sure that whatever your cost is being allocated by the right thing. So you don't wanna have your inspection costs be allocated by janitor hours. Those 2 things aren't related, so it's not gonna work correctly. But just make sure, you know, assembly costs are matched by assembly hours, machine costs are, you know, paired with machine hours, and if you do that, your ABC costing should be decently accurate. And that's all you gotta know for this class, in my opinion. And if you write that down, you should get the majority of the credit. Just make sure your cost and whatever you're allocating it by, they're related. And that's pretty much it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this first video for the Practice Prelim 2. If you guys have any questions, unfortunately, I think the teacher's telling me to have no comments allowed for these videos, so you can't comment down your question, but you know, as always, you can always come to office hours and ask, you know, me or Professor Paz or one of the other TAs on more information on how to do these questions. Yeah, hope this helped, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.